Is it time for a mind shift? If you don't know what that means, then join your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, a former evangelical Christian pastor and Bible college teacher of over 20 years, along the journey of deconstruction and reconstruction of faith, life, religion, and spirituality.
I'm super happy to be catching up with my good friend Frank Schaeffer. I don't know how long it's been, at least a year and a half. So welcome back, Frank, to Mind Shift Podcast.
Hey, my pleasure. It really is. I was thrilled when I saw your name pop up and the scheduling and, okay, we're going to do this. Great. It's Clint.
Actually going to do it. Yeah, actually, I was thinking about maybe a year ago we were going to catch up, and then we said, hang on, let's do this again. And then for some reason, a year flew past, so it wasn't for lack of trying, I guess.
Yeah, well, the years come and go, but here we are. We're doing it now.
It's true. It's true. In fact, it's very poignant because now that it's been at least a couple of years, I think, since we talked, the last time we talked, obviously we went way into your backstory, you and your famous father, Francis Schaeffer, how you were key instrumental part in getting the anti-abortion movement off the ground in evangelical America. I mean, I think you've been talking about that a lot lately. You must have.
Well, yeah, I mean, with the Supreme Court we have with 6 majority justices having been, carved out a place for themselves on the far right, and half of them are appointments from Trump and, Amy Coney Barrett. It's like this won't go away. It's so funny. When I wrote my memoir, Crazy for God, I don't know how long ago it came out. I should check that out sometime, but I'm guessing 15 years. It's been in print. I thought, okay, this is the headstone on this tomb. I'm burying this subject. I don't have to ever answer a question on this again. I really did think that the religious right is going away, and there's this small fringe crazy minority, but basically, great, I've done that. Now I'm going to go back and do other things. And then, of course, the very story I tell in Crazy for God of the rise of the religious right and the part my family played and my regrets and why I left it, far from being ancient history, suddenly I'm being questioned on American TV and radio and other places, like last Friday, on with Joy Reid, on Read Out, on MSNBC. What are we talking about? Ripped from the headlines, and it's the same thing. So, you go back 15 years, and I said, this is going to be an issue. Watch out for the rise of the religious right. And then all of a sudden, the only thing that's changed is a little bit of linguistic description. Now we talk about Christian nationalism, but it's the same people and or their kids. It's generational now. This has been going on for a while. So it's a little crazy for me because I'm 70 years old. I'd rather be concentrating on my grandchildren. And I'm still talking about this shit.
Decades later.
And it's your fault, Clint.
It's
something else.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's got to be a counter narrative. I think we may have touched on this before when we talked about Crazy for God, in that your book goes directly diametrically opposed to the narrative that the Christian right tells about its sort of stance on pro-life, anti-abortion. Isn't that right? I mean, it's a complete
but I mean, it's more than that, because I really understand the religious right in America and how it took over the Republican Party. I know where the bodies are buried. I know what happened. And it's not a conspiracy. It's just a movement in history that, since I was literally in the room with people, like Congressman Jack Kemp and Ronald Reagan and all these other people, I know that they adopted these issues as a matter of convenience to both raise money and get votes. So I was there when this whole sort of falsified narrative was being hatched. And I've carried that knowledge with me. So, for instance, I'll give you an example where I take a little bit of a different take on things. Last week, the news was that the Supreme Court had put a stay on the ruling by a pro-life judge in the middle of nowhere who had suddenly said that what's known as the abortion pill, it's basically a morning after pill for people, in the first couple of weeks of pregnancy, to terminate a pregnancy. And he put a stay on the whole thing, saying that the FDA hadn't decided it was safe properly, and it's been in the market for 20 years, so it's an absurdity. And the court put a stay. Well, what I was explaining to Joy Reid on MSNBC, I said, listen, you have to understand something. They're still going to ban this pill they basically are trying to figure out how to get away with it because they didn't count on the pushback after Roe went down. They're worried, and what they want to do now is wait and give their political leaders a chance to take the presidency, the House, and the Senate again without making this an even bigger issue. Mark my words, when the Democrats lose the next election, if they do, this will recycle. And if you don't want this to happen, forget the court, elect Democrats and push back hard at this kind of white nationalist, Christian nationalist right wing that's taken over the Republicans, which is the kind of next step after the religious right and makes what we were doing look like a Sunday school picnic. So I try to bring something to bear when I talk about this out in the marketplace of ideas with people who didn't grow up in that background, that these guys have been planning for 40, 50 years to do this stuff, as in the Federalist Society had put their list together. People like Amy Coney Barrett were being groomed 15 years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And they had them all waiting, and the list was ready to go for Donald Trump. So when he became president, Franklin Graham and Ralph Reed walked into his office. I know about this meeting because I know people who work with both of them. And they literally said, we don't like you, you adulterous scumbag, basically. They didn't use those words, but if you'll sign off on this, here's the issue we care about. And he did. And so what do you get? You get these appointments of this judge who struck down the distribution of the morning after abortion pill, which has been perfectly safe and legal for 20 years. And then you have Alito and these other guys on the court basically strategizing and saying, okay, wait a minute here. If we do this on top of knocking down Roe, then we're going to hand the Democrats even more of a cudgel with which to pound us in the 2024 election. Let's not do that now. So they didn't roll it back. They just put a stay on the ruling for further thought. And basically what will happen is lo and behold, if they see the next election rolling around and they put their own people back in power, because they're really just, the Supreme Court is now dominated by Republican operatives. They're political operatives. They're not justices anymore in the classical sense of the law being above politics. They aren't even pretending. So, they make decisions giving evangelical Christian and Catholic groups special rights. They can discriminate against gay people, or you don't have to bake a cake for a gay wedding, or whatever it may be, from the trivial to the more important. And then on the other hand, it comes to this kind of push for theocracy. And what I think a lot of the people in the secular media don't get is that this didn't just sort of fall out of the air. People like my father were working for this 50, 60 years ago, and Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, and the others. And now you have the fruit of their labors. While Democrats were screwing around, not paying any attention to evangelicals because they were the unwashed mob who lived in the middle. They didn't know anybody from Kansas City. That kind of snooty
Rust Belt.
Yeah, the Rust Belt, the whole bit. Then all of a sudden, here they are, and they've already put one lunatic in power. They've got a whole armed nationalist Christian white movement that are wearing AR-15 pins in church and in Congress, where they used to wear American flags. And it's like, oh, shit. Now what? Well, it's a little late to be thinking about this, boys. I've been telling you this for the last 30 years.
Yes, and that's why your book and your work is such a corrective, isn't it? Because what is that narrative that the Christian right is telling? Because I'm mindful, you mentioned Jerry Falwell Sr. Yeah, he said basically maybe a year or two after the Moral Majority was founded, so it would have been probably early 1980s, he said basically the minute I heard that the Roe versus Wade had been passed, I was outraged and I was determined to do something about it. I was in a righteous anger, and that's when I started the Moral Majority, blah, blah, blah. But of course, your book completely gives the lie to that storyline, doesn't it? That was not the case at all. It wasn't abortion that motivated guys like Falwell in the least, was it?
Well, with Falwell in particular, it was segregation, and his school had been segregated, and he had to desegregate and then back down because that was no longer going to fly if you were going to do anything that had any kind of involvement with federal anything. And then, he needed another hot issue. And fast forward to today, well, guess what? Right now, they've gotten Roe pushed back, so they won on that. And now they're lying low because they realize this isn't playing well, and they still want to win elections, even though if they lose, of course, they're going to say it was stolen. So it's kind of, you lose either way with these guys because they're anti-democracy people. But they need a new target. So now, since abortion is a little tarnished for them, it's a little messier than they thought it would be. So now what they're doing is they are, of course, picking on trans people and saying the sky's falling again. And no, remember that we were telling you it was all about defending babies' lives. Now what we've got is a whole new situation where what we've got going is not babies' lives. What we've got going is, our children are being corrupted in schools by these books, by all this other stuff. So
the homosexual agenda.
Yeah, the homosexual agenda. So it's basically it's like the 70s again. There's homosexual teachers and they're trying to recruit your son. It's
Drag Queen Story Hour.
Yeah, it's just a revamped version of that.
Well, you mentioned Christian nationalism. To what extent is this movement, inspired by that? Because even a guy like Falwell, he was an ardent Christian nationalist, and it seems like the storyline that guys like him told Pat Robertson and others back in the 70s and 80s was that they finally, when they settled on the abortion topic, they said, okay, the reason this is so important to overturn Roe versus Wade is because it's stopping God from blessing America. He famously said that after 9/11, didn't he? Jerry Falwell said, when we kill 40 million little babies, we make God angry, and that's why we're in the state we're in. So we're getting these judgments from God. So abortion and Christian nationalism and homosexuality, they're like corporate sins, aren't they? America's, sliding from its Christian nation status.
Yeah, and in the same time frame, Oral Roberts was sitting in his prayer tower at Oral Roberts University saying, if I don't get $3 million by tomorrow, I'm going to die. God has told me
God's going
to
take
me. We laugh, but the thing is, these people have been, are now, and always were con artists. So it never was about any of the issues. Jerry Falwell didn't give a shit about anything. It was always about raising the next amount of money. And that's how it's been from the beginning with all of them. And, so there was no daylight between Oral Roberts saying, if you don't send me $3 million, if I don't raise $3 million by tomorrow, God's taking me home. And Jerry Falwell saying, if we don't stop the homosexual agenda, God will punish our country. Or Pat Robertson saying, the reason this big hurricane's bearing down on Virginia this morning is because we've taken 10 commandments out of our schools. It's always the same story. So it's a kind of a weird mixture of apocalyptic fantasy, con artists shit. I mean, just so obvious, it boggles the mind, save us money, save America. And then you have to keep your people continually stirred up. And it's always, it's never, send me $25 so that I can make America a better place, a fair place, a more democratic place, more of a level playing field. No. Let's save America from the homosexuals, save America from trans people, save America from abortionists, save America from feminists, save America from pornographers, on and on the list.
Yeah. You have to have an enemy.
Yeah. And so basically every time there's a drop in crime or the economy's doing well without their agenda going forward, this is like a blow for them. What the Republicans want is to make sure that the Biden presidency is a failure. They will take the whole economy down if they have to by not increasing the debt limit, just to make sure that they can blame him for something. Well, the evangelicals are exactly the same. They have an apocalyptic fantasy agenda. Bad news is good news to them. The worse anything is happening, but that's fine. And then, of course, they sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. These guys also, the flip side, speaking of authentically real bad news that's measurable, on the flip side, they are the backbone, the guts, the feet, the mind, the head of the NRA and the whole gun lobby. So evangelicals have 5 times, white evangelical families in America have, I said 5, it isn't 5, it's 3 times more guns per household than any other faction in America.
Wow.
So they're the most armed, and they're the people that don't have one AR-15, they have 5, and they do Christmas cards, their kids holding, and they have 1,000 rounds of ammunition up in their bedroom. This is an armed group of people. And I just interviewed Jeff Charlotte, who wrote this book called The Family.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I know Jeff, yeah.
Yeah, Jeff has a new book called Scenes from a Slow Civil War, and it's called The Undertow. And I interviewed him last week. Well, he went around the country talking to all these armed groups in their kind of readouts. He would go to places in Montana where they were training and all this. And honestly, it's a very well-written book, by the way, but in addition to which, it's just very factual. He's not being scary.
Sensationalize it.
He's not sensationalizing. He's just saying, hey, they're armed. This is what they think. And they are not collecting weapons for hunting or home protection. They are collecting arsenals because they're expecting to have to shoot it out with the federal government. And
That's true.
These are anti-government people. And he makes a case in the book, a really strong case for the fact that this is the beginning of a genuine American fascist movement, very much as you saw in the 1930s with Father Kuglan, with this Roman Catholic fascist, pro-Hitler, anti-Jewish, anti-Semite, had a radio show that at that time was the most listened to. He was the Tucker Carlson of that era, you know,
Rush Limbaugh of the day.
The Rush Limbaugh of the day, and basically we've seen this before, but it last time to push this fascistic white tendency away. This same Christian nationalism, because that's what Kuglan was all about. You know, the Jews are coming. They're not our people. It took World War II. Hitler had to attack Britain and Japan had to attack us to basically have Father Kuglan and Henry Ford and Lindbergh, the pilot, who was also a pro-fascist Hitler aficionado. You know, all of a sudden they all look bad because now every American wakes up one morning and we're at war and they're on the side of the enemy. So then they just shut up and weaseled away. Yeah. We don't have anything like that. So Tucker Carlson, who, by the way, just got thrown out of Fox News today. I
didn't hear about that.
Yeah, well, you will. And he just announced, and they didn't even give him a time to say goodbye to his audience. So he really was kicked out.
Wow, unceremoniously given the boot.
Unceremoniously. He just cost them $800 million. So, you know, that's $2 billion. And it was like, okay, we're done with this idiot. We're moving on. But the fact is, if you look at Tucker and what he was saying in stirring up white fear, it was exactly what Reverend Kuglan was doing in the 30s. Yeah. And it was exactly what Jerry Falwell was doing against gay people. And it's exactly what my dad and me were doing against what we were pitching as a kind of a feminist assault on Christian values. Oh yeah, and abortion. But it was really the women we were going after, tapping into the deep strain of misogyny that is as basic to Christianity, Judaism, and Islam as any part of its religious doctrine. So the subservience of women is what Judaism, Christianity, and Islam all taught in their scriptures. And that's where we've been, that's where it's been at.
They're deeply patriarchal religions. Yeah. I've been doing a lot of stuff.
That's the picture anyway. So anyway, when you get into this idea of Christian nationalism, this is not some new phenomena. No. It's not even a post Francis Schaeffer pro-life phenomena. It is a part of American history that goes back to the beginning, our founding, and has always been there. And it's seesawed back and forth with our other founding principles, which came out of the French Enlightenment. And so there's always this battle that goes forward, and you've seen it in the seesawing majorities of the Supreme Court. And right now, the people that have the upper hand are indistinguishable in their values from, say, the theocrats running Iran. They're not making women cover their hair, but they're going to take away their abortion pill. They're not going to do public hangings, but they're going to roll back. My friend Ernie Gregg, my producer of my podcast, by the way, just a little plug here,
Shameless plug.
Frank Schaeffer, and my other podcast, Love in Common, that Ernie is part of. Well, he's gay. He's been married 17 years to Rock, who happens to be a pastor. Two men married, have a great relationship, and Ernie and Rock are genuinely frightened because what was unthinkable to them a few years ago, like, oh, we've crossed that bridge, we're going to be allowed to live in peace now, not so fast. So,
exactly,
it's all under threat again. Anyway,
it is. Well, that's one of the things we talked about. We had an episode, it would have been the twilight of the Trump era then, because you and I connected when they were, I think, either nominating or just had nominated Amy Coney Barrett. We went into all that. And you basically predicted at that time, so that would have been, 3 years ago now? Almost now. You basically predicted, you said, they're going to not only now overturn Roe versus Wade, now that they've got this majority, the next step is they're going to start coming after LGBTQ rights, because that's the next big agenda item on the part of the Christian right, isn't it? And you can see that coming in. I don't know if you're familiar with Project Blitz, but that's another thing.
That's Project Blitz.
Yeah. I did a thing on that the other day, and it's quite interesting because it starts out, the bills are fairly innocuous sounding. We're going to put the 10 Commandments up or put "In God We Trust" on the license plate. But when you get toward the end of it, it's all about marriage and adoption rights for intact heterosexual married couples.
Yeah.
So it excludes all LGBTQ, same-sex, all that. So that's really where they're going with this thing, isn't it?
And they always look for the weakest link or the one that has the least supporter people. And they're saying, oh, well, polls show a lot of people favor gay marriage. So wait a minute, what do we do here? Okay, we'll start with the trans people because there's a lot of folks who are disinterested in this issue, but they see a picture of some big sweaty guy dressed as a woman now throwing a shot put. Let's go that way.
Yeah,
we can scare them about their children. So what they always do is they look at the fringe of the movement that they are going to go to. They don't look at the 99.999% of people who are my friend Ernie and rock.
Yeah, or my dog.
They'll find anything that makes it look like a freak show, and they say that's what they're after. So you get one trans teacher doing something weird in the school, and all of a sudden that's what trans people are. And of course, hey, let's be fair, the left does that too. The only difference is that Tucker Carlson wasn't a fringe figure. Fox owns the media. The right lunatic fringe are sitting in Congress wearing AR-15 pins and pushing QAnon theories from the House floor.
Yeah. Yeah, the Marjorie Taylor Greene.
It isn't that both movements don't have fringes. The difference is the fringe has taken over the Republican Party, whereas the Democratic Party is still run by sane people.
There's a few out there. Yeah, you got the Marjorie Taylor Greenes, the Lauren Boeberts, Matt Gaetz, those kind of people actively pushing QAnon and getting reelected by a landslide.
Yeah.
Hugely popular. It's shocking stuff, isn't it? When we come back from the break with this conversation with Frank Schaeffer, I'm going to get into the issue of gun rights in America. And lately, Frank's been doing a lot of work on this. And in fact, he's tied in not only what's going on in terms of the mass shootings in America, which are on an unprecedented scale, even for America, he's going to connect that to the abuse of children within the church. So we're going to get into those issues as well as some other things in the second half. So stay tuned for that. I just wanted to let you know what's coming up here in the next few episodes on Mindship Podcast. I actually put this chat with Frank ahead of the one I was going to drop originally with Venny Kocius. In fact, I had that conversation with her the other day. It's an absolutely fascinating story, and it turns out that she grew up in an unbelievable, just a classic cult environment. We're talking compounds, guns, working, people almost to the point of exhaustion. Just every classic cult marker you can think of, she grew up in the Sam 5 Move of God cult. It is truly an unbelievable, amazing story of cult survival, escape, and then rebuilding your life. So you're not going to want to miss that one. So that's coming up next. And then, as promised, I'm hoping that I'll have a little bit of time to get that episode out on Doug Wilson, the issue of Southern slavery as it was. I've got a lot of research that I've done. So hopefully I'll be able to squeeze that one in. And I've been in touch with some other people. We've got some things in the pipeline coming up. I've been in touch with the Cult Vault podcast as well as the guys from the Excommunication Station. So we're working on some collaborative episodes with these other shows. And then finally, I've been in touch with Laura Anderson. She was on the show a long time ago, a couple years back, I think it was. She's a therapist and she's done a lot of stuff on religious trauma syndrome. So we're looking to book in a recording about her new book that's just come out. So stay tuned for some really great content heading your way. The other thing I was going to mention is that this Sunday, as this episode drops on the 30th of April, I'm going to be doing a presentation for the Atheists of Florida about the toxic legacy of biblical patriarchy. I think this is the third or fourth presentation that I've done for AOF. You can RSVP. You can go to atheistofflorida.org. It's still not too late to get on that Zoom call as I do this presentation. Then, as always, there's going to be a question and answer period afterwards. And of course, a lot of this relates to the research that I did in all of my episodes on the controversial pastor/cult leader Doug Wilson out of Moscow, Idaho. So I'm going to be taking a deep dive into this very controversial topic of the legacy of biblical patriarchy. So hopefully you can join me along with the Atheists of Florida on the 30th. I just want to mention too that I've been putting a lot of content out on Patreon. I'm trying to put stuff out there that's just for patrons of the show. I've done one on Mark Driscoll, the cult leader I've also done a little episode on Project Blitz. These are only things that you can access by being a Patreon supporter of the show, as well as our closed Mindshift podcast Zoom calls that we have once a month. We just had one the other day with Chris Shelton, and the video for that is going to be available, again, only on Patreon. Next month, we've got Nate Manderson. He's a writer for Salon. I just did an episode with him, so he's going to be coming back in the month of May. So again, you can access those Zoom calls only by being a Patreon supporter of the show. And in fact, I wanted to give a thank you to some of the newest Patreon supporters of the show. A big thank you to Margot Katz, as well as Vincent Liongar and Brenda Silbury. Thank you all for your support of the show. It is hugely beneficial to me. In fact, if you want to be a Patreon supporter of the show, as always, the links for that are in the show notes, so you can find out how to connect with me there. You can also follow me on Twitter at Mindshift2018, as well as you can send me a message on the public Mindshift podcast page. So there's a couple of ways you can get a hold of me on social media. All right, let's get back on into the second half of this chat with my good friend Frank Schaeffer as we continue to take a look at this issue of God, guns, and abortion. Well, you mentioned gun rights as well. Now, that's another thing, because you posted up on Facebook the other day a kind of I don't know, 8 or 10 minute talk about the complicity, this collateral damage between, supporting gun rights on the one hand and allowing so many children to be killed by guns in America. I mean, the statistics are shocking coming out of this year. As we're doing this recording, I think there's been about 160 mass shootings. Yes. Since January, so there's been more mass shootings than there's been days.
And gun deaths the mass shootings aren't even where most of the kids die. They're dying in accidents at home or murder-suicide pacts. And now, since 2 years ago now, for the first time in American history, the number of gun deaths now account for the greatest number of fatalities amongst children of any single cause, more than accidents. So it's shocking when you think about the fact that more kids die with a gunshot in America every year than from any other single source. So it's the highest childhood fatality numbers.
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy to the point of being sickening. But again, the sad thing is that there would have been no Donald Trump without the evangelical voter. There's no QAnon movement without the evangelical followers now. There's no, Marjorie Taylor Greene or any of these other idiots without her evangelical voters. Roe is still in place. The Supreme Court would look fairly reasonable and so forth. Once again, if you find out what the lunatic fringe is that supports the NRA, who are these guys? It's white pastors who are armed to the teeth with their own congregants carrying weapons in church.
Yeah.
And then the result is, just in the last couple of weeks, for instance, not just mass shootings, but the rage of these people, this unhinged gun-carrying majority in America and places like Texas, where you've got a kid rings the wrong doorbell and gets shot to death.
I saw that.
And then, and it's not just black kids getting shot by white racists. A girl in a parking lot gets a cheerleader in her cheerleader's costume. Two teenagers get into the wrong car in a parking lot outside of Walmart, and they're shot. A ball rolled from one neighbor's lawn onto another neighbor, and the neighbor next to it had been yelling at him for some time about, "Don't let that ball get over here." He opens fire on the family, wounds a child, puts the mother in critical condition and the father in the hospital with minor injuries. These are just isolated incidents, let alone all the road rage and shit.
Yeah.
Look, you have an armed public. The Supreme Court says you don't need a license, you don't need any special instruction, and we're not going to do background checks, and you're free to carry a gun with no permit. That is their position, and they're trying to force it, for instance, on New York City, that has had tighter regulation trying to fight crime. Well, what the hell do you think would be happening? I wouldn't want Jeannie and me. I've been married 53 years, but we've had fights. I'd never strap on a gun and carry it around my house. And what happens if we have a couple drinks too many and the fight pulls out a thing and I half-jokingly pull a gun out and shoot her? I mean, the contingency is remote, but it's not impossible. It's happening every day.
It happens.
And the bullet goes through the wall and there's a kid in the crib. I mean, these guys are so stupid. It's a death wish. And then they said, well, it's not guns that kill people. Like, oh, yeah? Well, then why isn't gun death the leading cause of childhood trauma and death in any other country on earth? Any country, even countries at war.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, think about it. It's not the leading cause of death in right now in the war that's going on that the Russians are prosecuting against the Ukrainians. Even there, gun death is not the leading cause of children's death, but it is in America.
Yeah, you take an active combat zone, and it's actually safer right now to be in Ukraine. There's something seriously wrong with that.
Yeah, if you're under 18, you're safer in Ukraine than you are in America. And we're not talking inner cities with black kids shooting each other, just to cut to the racist thing here. We're talking about two teenagers get in the wrong kind of parking lot and some son of a bitch shoots at them. What kind of level of deluded paranoia do you have to have a gun so handy in your car that if two teens in cheerleader outfits open your car door, you open fire? I mean, what? Yep. Sorry, what the fuck?
And you see the story about, you mentioned the guy that shot the black kid on his front porch.
Yeah.
Turns out he was a rabid Fox News guy, hard right guy.
Yeah.
Reminds me of, the sort of that original Rush Limbaugh type character. He wound up so many people. They're so angry and afraid that clearly this kid what was he going to do? Rob him? So he just shot through the door and killed him.
Yeah, and it all started. There was a case. We have so many of these multiplying that we forget the cases. But I remember about 7-8 years ago when Florida when everybody, when the open carry thing started in Florida, the first one that I remember reading about of this type of fluky stupidity was the guy in the movie theater who shot the guy in front of him because he was talking in the movie.
Well, he had a good reason for it.
And this was old stupid white guy on old stupid white guy.
Yeah.
I mean, what the hell?
What goes on?
Yeah, and I can remember about 7 years ago, I was speaking at Rice University in Houston to a graduate class there that was studying Crazy for God as part of their History of Religion course. And I did a guest appearance. I was Rice's guest, but then I did a guest appearance at the University of Texas when I was in Texas. I forget which city it was. And one of the deans who was showing me around ruefully says to me, now, I know you're from Massachusetts and, you have a reputation as someone who's pretty liberal, but I don't know how to say this, but a lot of our young people are pretty far to the right. And, you just have to assume that a fair proportion of them are carrying. And I was so naive at the time. I said, well, carrying what? I mean, I really wondered if he was telling me that half the girls were pregnant or something.
Yeah.
Like carrying what?
Yeah.
No, they're armed because a lot of these kids come from white rural areas. They're at the state university. They're in a big, bad city because it's Houston. Black people live there. Mexicans live there.
People of color.
It's dangerous. They're carrying weapons. And we've had to tell guest speakers to just realize that, if, for instance, you got into an altercation while you were speaking, you just have to keep the temperature of the discourse low, he tells me.
Right. They could take a pot shot at it.
Sitting there going, what the hell are you talking about? I've been speaking at universities off and on for the last 40 years, supporting my books.
Yeah.
I'd never have anybody tell me, and I'm not some lunatic French guy that draws protesters. I mean, I might, in the future, because things are going so crazy, but I'm not a figure who courts controversy. So it's totally crazy. And he's saying to me, yeah, but you just have to remember, a lot of them have psychological problems. They come from these rural backgrounds. They're very paranoid. And, all I'm saying is just, don't get into an altercation with somebody. And he says, we're telling all our visiting speakers that.
I can't even imagine that. It's absolute madness. But you say that you don't court controversy, but I'm going to call it more of a rant the other day on Facebook than anything else, because you not only linked the gun thing, you started talking about the church. You said the child abuse endemic within the Catholic Church.
Yes.
Sure. Look at the Southern Baptist Church.
Yeah.
We're putting up with the fact that these guys are abusing children. So children are getting shot by guns, and they're also getting abused by the church. You're making that connection. How do you break that down?
Well, the fact of the matter is that America, what's so funny, from the conservative side, they talk about abortion, but they've got it. This is an antenatal culture. We don't have parental leave for parents that's paid. Corporations pay for it if they want. They don't have to. Government pays nothing. Every time there's a chance to cut back on any kind of assistance to families, it's cut back. Briefly, for a few minutes, something good happened during COVID, and the poverty rate in children dropped by 1/3 in 1 year. I mean, it didn't take much. You just lift your little finger, you can help people. So that's the overarching context. And then within that context, the so-called pro-life Christians are all about what happens to kids before they're born. They don't give a shit the second the child's born. And in addition to that, you have the Republicans playing with the debt limit, always trying to cut funding. And what do they cut? It's never the military. It's, it's never their big projects. It's always around sniffing around the edges of any kind of a safety net. And so when you put all that together, the atmosphere is toxic when it comes to actually helping kids. So, the schools have cops in them. You see all these horrible videos posted where, some 6-year-olds being dragged off in handcuffs. I'm not making that shit up. That happens.
Oh, yeah, it happens.
And God help you if you're a 13-year-old big black kid, teen, girl or boy, they're just going to beat the shit out of you. Like as if you were a murderer suspect who had just been arrested with a machine gun. They treat you like shit in these schools across the country. They're scared of their own children. And then you sort of bookend that with banning books and stopping kids from studying American history because it's embarrassing to, white nationalists and so forth. And by the time you're done, a lot of people in America seem to look at our kids almost like enemies. Like these, they pretend they're afraid for them when it comes to a trans person being able to speak at a high school. But, when it comes to actually doing anything for them, they're totally hypocrites. They do nothing.
It's true. And as we've said, how many times has it been said, the pro-life movement, you're protected as long as you're a fetus. But once you're born, hey, kid, you're pretty much on your own. The hypocrisy is just so blatant, isn't it? I mean, the pro-gun, pro-military, pro-everything that militates against children once you're born, hey, that's you're on your own, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course, one of the highest rates of death from guns in America is suicide. And the very people committing suicide are are these white nationalists, depressed, hard-drinking, drug-addled people who, are hoarding all the guns too, and or white pastors who are preaching some version of hate and fear of race war, whatever. When you put it all together, without trying to sound clever, but the last people in America who should have a gun are the ones that are collecting them.
Exactly.
Their psychological profile. And the NRA doesn't even want checks on people to keep it out of the hands of people who have been repeatedly arrested for domestic abuse.
No.
I mean, you can't even get guns out of their hands. And so what you got going here? So the people who kill, the people who die most often in America from a gun shot are white American males committing suicide. That's the highest number.
Yeah.
Okay. So the very people that supposedly, these people are such bastards, if I could put it this way, they don't even protect their own.
Exactly.
In other words, they worship the gun to the point where there's going to be a guy you meet at the last NRA deal who also has opiate addiction. He's about 120 pounds overweight. He's a miserable son of a bitch, and he's on the edge of society, angry, and you're telling him to collect guns. Well, guess what? You're going to find him sprawled in his bathroom having blown his own brains out. That's the most people who die from guns in America, is suicide of white males.
It's true.
Because they're a very despairing bunch of people themselves. I mean, they're also victims of a system and a way of thinking that has left them behind. And instead of helping them, the Republican Party just says, no, we can raise another $25 out of this guy's anger. Let's just make him mad at the trans guy who bought an apartment across the street. They'll focus on that. Let's make him scared of the black people who come through his town sometimes, and, we'll get him to buy another gun. And they take all the donations from the NRA. They never do a thing. So these sons of bitches don't even take care of their own, which is basically downtrodden white older males who kill themselves by droves.
It's true. And they made such a big deal about the shooting in Nashville. You had this trans woman, see there, that doesn't fit your profile, Frank. She was not a typical white, angry Christian nationalist. and there's a victim that they can, put up on there and say, or they can vilify this person.
Sigh of relief goes up.
Yeah. Finally, we have a trans person.
One. Yeah.
One out of hundreds, thousands. And I have to explain to my British friends over here in the UK, they're asking me all the time, what the hell is going on in America? I mean, how come you keep having these shootings? How come nothing ever gets done?
And the funny thing is, the shootings are the tip of the iceberg, because numerically, there's far less people dying in the shootings than there are from suicides. There's far less people dying in the shootings than there are from these random, crazy, dumb, stupid, open carry, laws in Florida that tell you can shoot if you feel threatened. Well, does that include 2 high school girls in cheerleader things? When they open your car door, you just open fire? I mean, God damn.
What you do. That's crazy. Yeah, and it seemed like we never learned anything. I remember this came across in your other book. We talked about, after the COVID lockdown, your book, Fall in Love, Have Children and all that, Stay Put, Save the Planet, Be Happy. You said, that was such a completely different perspective. My question now, a couple of years after all the lockdowns, have we learned anything? Because I feel like I was thinking about you, when we went back to work after COVID, and we asked at work, well, can we work from home certain days? And it's saving the planet, it's helping the environment, saving me money on fuel to go back and forth to work. If I'm just sitting on my computer, we've demonstrated we can do that from home. We seem like we haven't learned a damn thing. We're just right back in the shit, aren't we? We never seem to learn anything.
Yeah, and the thing is, if you study a little history, which I know you do and I do as well, you see that these arcs are long, and we all want things to happen in our lifetime. But the sad reality is that most arcs of history take a long time to come about, and then they take a long time to subside, and the aftermath is always sometimes worse than the actual event. Mm-hmm. So when you look, for instance, at what's happened in Russia, okay, there was the Soviet Union and the communists and the death camps of their own people up in the Gulag, and all this horrible shit. It's still going. I mean, here we are in 2023, coming up to 2024. They've, part of the old guard there has launched a land war in Ukraine. Tucker Carlson and Fox News supporting it over here. It standing in for Kugler, supporting the Nazis. It's like nothing has changed.
Yeah. A lot of evangelicals did too. I think worship Putin.
Yeah, we don't get through this. So what we do is we say, look, we can make it better. We can't fix it, but we can push back. We can make sure that Democrats keep the Senate, win the House back, and take the presidency next time. Does that fix everything? No, but it pushes back, and we hope seesaw back and forth, the pendulum swings, and then gradually, you get to a place where outright racial discrimination and white-only fountains and hotels become illegal, and you sort of move on, and then you take a step back because now nobody wants to take the history. But it's not all the way back. So now Roe goes down, but hey, there's going to be a lot of states where abortion is still legal, and so women do, in total, shabby as it is, have a little more rights as 52% of our country than they did before the whole thing. Mm-hmm. You never do a slam dunk, and that's the end of the game. And that, of course, I think that's not just the states. I mean, look at the women in Iran being raped in police stations because they don't want to wear a headscarf.
Exactly.
I mean, shit. This whole rise of authoritarian government combined with biblical absolutes here in America, Quranic absolutes in Iran and Saudi Arabia, Hindu nationalism in India. It isn't just America. The seesaw of history, is not just apartheid South African whites versus the good guys in the ANC, and then they win their battle. No, it never ends because, of course, half the ANC leaders turn into corrupt thieves and run everything into the ground. We've seen the same thing here in America. It isn't just Iranian mullahs that are assholes who want everybody to worship God the way they do or they're going to kill them. We got them right here. So I think two things we need in the American context is one is more of a global historical perspective, understanding that we are in a global fight against fundamentalist religion per se across the board, being manipulated and used by hypocritical leaders in power, whether it was Bolsonaro in Brazil or Trump here, they were at the same time, or they, even worse, are true believers and they really believe they're doing the will of God. So this is genuine old war of religion, Tyndall being, executed, burnt, whatever. We're back there, and India's political leadership encouraging Hindu nationalism, burning down people's mosques, and then conversely, in the cast of characters in Iran, just horrible men, these bearded jerks going after their own young women and students because they don't dress according to whatever. It isn't one isolated problem. You look at Israel, what's going on the West Bank? Who is it? It's the crazy, deluded, nutcase Orthodox pushing the idea of greater Israel, making sure that every single effort to have any kind of peace agreement or two nations is undermined, up into, including violence against people. This picture, it is not an American problem. The difference in America is, with a lot of these other places, is, with the tens of millions of weapons we have floating around this country, and this delusional idea that the very reason you arm yourself is to stand against the government, means that we have this ideology of armed conflict, even when we're not using the guns. The very fact that somewhere in the back of your head, they're there. Look, I have a 22. Okay, it's single shot, because once in a while a rabid skunk comes into my property, and if I don't get him, he's going to go and bite somebody, and it's totally safe, and it's one shot, and if I miss, nothing happens. But I live in a rural area. Now, if I lived in the UK, that would be legal too, by the way. I could have a shotgun on a farm.
That's true.
And I have a permit and all the rest of it, and I don't wave it around. Yes, I don't wave it around at my neighbors if they ring the wrong doorbell. That's not my thing. So I'm not anti-gun, as in the sense of, I'm not like about guns the way vegans are about meat. You know what I mean? I'm not being facetious about vegans, but it's not a thing for me. But, when you get to the situation we have in America, you have to understand that the reason all those millions of AR-15s sell is because the NRA deliberately, hand in glove with the gun industry, stirred up a paranoid group of white gun owners saying, look, there's going to be a race war. They're going to come to your house. Not only that, the U.S. federal government is going to try to seize your weapons, and they're going to have to pry them out of our cold, dead hands. And
famous words. Yep.
Yeah, that whole
Charlton Heston.
Charlton Heston standing at the podium, holding a rifle. So when you fold that into it, gun ownership in America is not like, hey, benign, innocuous. It's just guys with collecting guns. Bullshit. These are weapons of war being collected by paranoid, delusional fanatics who believe that someday they're going to have to fight our government. Well, this is a really bad situation.
It is, and potentially getting worse. And now I know you have to go, but I do have one last question for you. What do you think is going to happen in 2024, the presidential election? Because there's some disturbing statistics. Trump's got lawsuits left, right, and center, and yet 70% of his base still, believes he's the guy. They're 100% behind him. And then the other sort of narrative is the Fox News lawsuit that you alluded to. The thing about that came out is when they called Arizona for Trump, that was a huge backlash against them. They started losing viewers, and that's when they decided, wow, this base is too powerful. It's too scary. We have to start catering to them. So that base is still there, supporting Trump and turning on to Fox News. So what's going to happen in 2024? Is it going to be DeSantis? Is it going to be Trump? What do you think?
I don't know who's going to run, but we also have another wrinkle, because both Trump and Biden are older gentlemen.
It's true.
And so, this in no way is casting a dark cloud or ominous threat to say, well, in no way implying violence or anything else, but either of these two guys could stroke out tomorrow morning and we have a new landscape. So the thing is, I'm 70 years old, and I'm not, if I was running for president, I might make it okay. I have a slightly enlarged prostate, but I could probably survive the race.
You go 4 years.
Yeah, but a couple of these guys, not so much. They're very old people. We have an octogenarian running on the Democrat side. So I'd say there's so many unknowns in terms of just health and age that there's no prediction. But I will say this, that if Trump runs again, I think that the Democrats will win, win the presidency. I don't know about the House, barring any kind of unforeseen health disaster.
Right.
3 days before the election, Biden has a stroke or something, there's no way to calculate that.
Yeah.
But other than that, I think that base is there, but they are not the majority of Americans. And I think the Republicans have overreached on so many levels. They're counting on a short attention span, but I think they're over counting on it. And I think Americans really don't want to sink into the chaos. And the other thing is where Biden has acted.
Yeah.
I talk about this all the time to people. I don't care how old he is. He's been a good, stable governing force, given that his own party's been divided between the moderates and the left.
Mm-hmm.
The economy is in compared to the UK, for instance, where you're sitting, the economy in the US is in very good shape, and Americans are consumers. Got to understand that.
Oh yeah.
Don't care about much shit over here except consumption, and he's playing that card. And so I would just say basically you're looking at a Democratic president, and and probably at least retaining one of the chambers in Congress, either the House or the Senate or both. I don't see the Republican Party being able to fight its way out of a paper bag as a party. QAnon hysteria aside, but there's a sadly there's a but here.
There's always a but.
Yeah, these guys have shown they don't accept election results where they lose.
That's true.
And so, does this give us a happy ending when there might be people standing at polling stations with guns who are angry about this? That's a whole nother chapter. So is America okay the next morning when Democrats win? Maybe not.
Yeah. Well, and we know there's a majority of Republicans. They responded to the one survey where they said basically something like, will you need to resort to violence if things come to that, And a majority of Republicans are saying, well, yeah, I will. So we saw it.
They've been told that the election would have been stolen. It's another level.
Oh yeah,
right. It's a QAnon thing, and they'll some of these idiots will act on it, and the rest of them who don't act on it will be so disgruntled and pissed off that they essentially will at every opportunity undermine what's going on, as we've seen in these rash of shootings at power stations where they shoot into transformers.
Oh yeah,
grid, and whole cities get blacked out, hospitals included.
Yeah,
as a kind
too
of
easy
protest because it's so easy.
Yeah, it is. It's too easy. It's a soft target, isn't it?
So we here in the USA have a rocky road ahead of us. I'm not a gloom and doom guy. I think we can do it. I think that history's long and there's many turns on this road, and there are plenty of sane people left in this country. But when you have many weapons floating around and so many people who, used to go to church and believe in Jesus now believe in QAnon and Trump, you got a problem.
You definitely do. Well, I'm interested to hear what you have to say. I don't want it to be another 2 or 3 years. I hope we can get back together.
Yeah, we'll do another one.
Okay, we will. I'll get a hold of EJ and we'll schedule something else coming up. But thank you so much, Frank.
Yeah, and put a link or two to my my podcasts.
Yeah, I was going to say, can you remind us really quick?
Yeah, I would like to remind you, first of all, it's Frank Schaeffer on Substack, and you can subscribe there and get everything. And then there's 2 podcasts, Love in Common, which is me and Ernie and Erin. And Erin is as a young woman with 2 kids. She's a movie maker. I'm an old guy with grandchildren, and Ernie is our married gay man, and we talk about relationships and morality in everyday American life. It's a good podcast.
Yeah.
And then we have mine that comes out just as frequently, called In Conversation with Frank Schaeffer. And then, of course, there's my books. And in terms of this conversation, the one to read is Crazy for God, my memoir, because that's basically, if you want to know what really happened, that's it.
That's it. Yeah, it's a great resource, great way to start with Frank Schaeffer. So thank you so much. I know you have to go. Thank you for spending the
Hey, my pleasure, Ken. Always good. We won't make a year go by just Ernie and schedule another one.
We will. Thank you so much, Frank. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.